Hello and welcome to anyone listening in today. This discussion forms our third and final one of this year's series, which we have chatted to some of Northern Ireland's most qualified, informed experts. We had originally planned to have this discussion on the 12th of April, but unfortunately technology wasn't our friend this morning and we weren't able to proceed. So we have all come together here together this time to record it, and then each of you can listen back to it in your own time, hopefully successfully this time, from your own homes or offices. So today is the last of our themed panel discussions, and this one in particular is of great importance. Today's topic of discussion is, could Northern Ireland face a social housing crisis? For those of us in particular working in the property industry, this is something that we all need to be aware of and have a greater understanding of, and recognise that we all have a responsibility to and play a role in helping to support the social housing sector. Joining me for today's discussion are two amazing speakers who are absolute experts in the field of social housing. We firstly have the brilliant and lovely Carol McTaggart, Group Chief Executive of Clanmil Housing Group, a role which, am I right in saying, Carol, was made official in January of this year?
That's right, Tanya.
Congratulations on that role, and I wish you all the very best of luck. It'll be no mean feat, especially in these uncertain times. And secondly, we have the esteemed Professor Paddy Gray, whose list of current, let alone former roles, is that lengthy I'm not even going to attempt to start to try and rhyme them all off, or I'll no fear doubt I will miss out on some of them. So thank you both very much for joining me today, and to everyone else listening in. Before we even get started on our discussion, could I ask you both maybe just to give a little bit of an overview or background into your current areas of work today and the background from where you worked previously? Carol, do you want to start?
Yes, thanks, Tanya, and thank you very much for your kind invitation. And as you said, I took over as the Group Chief Executive of Clanmil in January of this year. And prior to that, I had been the Group Director of Development for Clanmil, and I was responsible for leading the very ambitious growth agenda that Clanmil had in terms of delivering more social and affordable housing. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Northern Ireland Advisory Board of the Chartered Institute of Housing in Northern Ireland, and a Non-Executive Director of York Housing Association. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today, and having a discussion with my long-time colleague, Professor Paddy Gray, and looking forward to our chat this afternoon, Paddy.
Excellent, thank you. Paddy?
Thank you, Tanya, and lovely to meet both yourself and Carol again. As Carol has rightly said, both of us have been friends and colleagues for a long time. My name's Paddy Gray, and as you mentioned, I'm Professor of Housing, and had been responsible for running housing courses at Ulster University for about 30 years, near enough 30 years. Prior to that, I worked for the Northern Ireland Housing Executive in a number of roles, the last one being I was in charge of housing action areas in Belfast. Currently, I sit on a number of boards. I'll not go through them all, but I suppose some of the significant ones here in Belfast. I'm chair of Conswater Housing. I've just taken over chair of Tua Housing in the Republic of Ireland. I'm on the Residential Tenancies Board in the South, and I've just been appointed to the New Housing Commission in the South of Ireland as well. And I'm vice chair of Glasgow Housing and chair of the Wheatley Foundation.
I think it's fair to say there is certainly a wealth of knowledge and expertise between both our speakers today, so this is certainly going to be a very informative, interesting conversation. If anyone is listening in and has any questions that they would like to put to either Carol or Paddy at a further date and time, please forward them through to ourselves and I will certainly communicate them on to them at that point. So just to kind of kick things off, Paddy, can I maybe just start off by asking you to explain to our listeners what exactly is meant by the term social housing?
Okay, that's a good question as well. When I started out in housing, there was no such thing as social housing. It's a construct really that has developed in more recent years. People of my generation would have remembered the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, the Housing Trust before that, and housing associations. And in many ways, social housing has sort of become a concept or a term around the mid-90s. But in short, it's basically subsidised housing. It's housing for people who really cannot afford to buy or afford to rent in the private rented sector. And more importantly, it gives security for people for life, and people would also mention that it's a well-managed sector with a very high standard of professionalism, and that people really are secure in their homes. So, in a sense, social housing. We'll probably go into this later. I think maybe around the what it's seen as. It's I grew up in social housing. At that time, social housing was for everyone. I mean, we grew up in a small 20 aluminium bungalows. There was 20 families, and some of them were lawyers, some of them were unemployed, some were lorry drivers, some were, I was a single parent family. And at the end of the day, we all lived happily together. And unfortunately, things have changed a lot over the years, and social housing has now been seen more of welfare housing, which is not really the case. I'm sure as we go into this.
Thank you, Paddy. Yeah, that's really interesting, and certainly when you say there about social housing for everyone, I think that's very key, and something that's maybe been unfortunately lost. Carol, your experience, what way would you see the social housing sector in Northern Ireland? How does it look today?
So currently, as Paddy had alluded to, there are 20 housing associations that currently operate in Northern Ireland. And between the 20 housing associations, we own and manage about 56,000 homes throughout Northern Ireland. And that's about 6% of all of the homes in Northern Ireland. And alongside the housing executive, who obviously have around 85,000 homes, we work together to provide a home for those who either live in unsuitable housing conditions or have no home to call their own. And certainly the 20 housing associations, between us, we employ about 3,500 colleagues throughout Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. And through the delivery of the new social homes that we deliver each year, we actually add £1 billion to the economy of Northern Ireland.
My goodness.
But more importantly, if you sort of delve under the statistics, we currently in Northern Ireland have over 44,000 people who are registered on the waiting list for a social home. And of those, 31,000 people are deemed to be in housing stress.
Sadly, there's unfortunately a stigma around social housing homes in Northern Ireland, which I personally feel is very, very sad. It's a very negative belief. From your perspective, as Chief Executive of one of Northern Ireland's leading social housing associations, what is your view of why there's a stigma, or what do we as Northern Ireland people need to do to try to eradicate that belief?
Unfortunately, there is currently a stigma around social housing, and indeed the Chartered Institute of Housing ran a survey at the end of 2020, and they surveyed over 500 people, and actually, interestingly, over 46% of those surveyed said that they would not want to live in social housing. And yet, given the housing crisis and the number of families who are in need of a home, why should we be labelled by the fact that we cannot provide a home of our own because we don't have the economic means? Why should we be labelled about who we are by the type of home that we live in, or the type of home that we can afford to provide for ourselves and our families? And so therefore it is really important that we now have an open and honest conversation around social housing. And I would suggest that we should start to value social housing in the way we value our other public services. And really, these are the people who live in social housing, and my family were one of them. Mm-hmm. We just wanted a decent place to call home, and raise our family and be part of a sustainable community.
And you see, for members of the public and for developers that work in the industry, is there anything that yourself would suggest and recommend that we need to be doing on the ground to help with that view?
Yes, Tanya. The housing need is so great throughout Northern Ireland. I think there's a real opportunity for us to work better together. And particularly when we look at the evolving policy directives that are likely to come through in the adoption of the new local development plans. where there will be a requirement for the delivery of social and affordable housing in all new major housing developments. There is a real opportunity, if we are serious about doing better for the people of Northern Ireland and giving people a real chance in life with a decent home that they can live well, flourish and thrive. I think private developers and housing associations have a real opportunity to do better and work better together and deliver for all. And particularly when you think back to the statistic that I talked about the Northern Ireland sector, housing association sector, impacting £1 billion per annum. I mean, that has to be good news for developers. And Paddy, obviously coming from a board member, you might want to add something to that as well, Paddy.
I would perhaps could I just go back to the stigma first of mentions of that. Now I'll come back to that as well, Carol.
Yes.
But you know, Carol's quite right. I mean, what Carol mentioned is about us actually experiencing it ourselves. And said I grew up in a one-parent family, and I mean, there's no way that I would have been able to sort of achieve anything that I've achieved nowadays without having been able to have had the support of a community and without a stigma being attached at that time to housing. You know, stigma's attached nowadays, and it's, I suppose it's set in things like NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. You know, even if you'd mixed developments, if people can identify social housing, they'll go, we don't want that because it'll bring the values of our properties down, which is not the case. I mean, I'm a YIMBYism. I'm for yes in my backyard. And basically, why is social housing, why is there a stigma? Take COVID. I mean, housing officers were out in this, they did everything they could in their communities. They not only provided the management of homes, but all of the extras, the Housing Plus that housing associations and the housing executive do, the community development, the work they do. I mean, I think that the housing officers should have been clapped every Thursday night as well.
Yes, as well as NHS.
Because and it's as Carol rightly says, it's a public service. Why isn't that public service recognised in the way it is? And you're dealing with individual households. You're creating not just a home, but you're creating opportunities. You're creating, you're developing young people. A lot of children that live in housing, you want to give them the opportunities that everyone else gets as well. So I think put it up there to the top.
I do think that your point as well about bringing the developers on board. Like, I mean, there's certainly a lot of benefits to be gained from them getting on board with it, but I think that there's a responsibility by them as well, and they're certainly the people that can help to incorporate this, help with the shortage, and very much help with the stigma associated with it. It is something we all need to be part of.
It is, Tanya, because we have a big challenge because the demand is so great. And the challenge to organisations like my own is to build and deliver more homes. But we have a real challenge with availability of land and throughout Northern Ireland, and particularly in those areas of high housing need. And when you look at that in the carbon agenda, there's a real opportunity, for example, to look at modern methods of construction together, a real opportunity to do greater brownfield redevelopment of sites, bring empty homes back into use and find creative solutions that actually can deliver for those families who need a home, because they need a home now.
Absolutely. There's just if everybody comes together, there's just so many possibilities that we can all come together collectively to create that. I mean, as you say, the amount of, and I particularly work in this area, the number of empty homes dotted all around Northern Ireland, and it's such a shame that can be brought up to help with that shortage. It really is an absolute shame. And Paddy, you're involved with, as you mentioned earlier there, the Glasgow Housing Association. How does Northern Ireland's social housing system compare to our regional counterparts throughout the UK, particularly in Scotland?
Glasgow Housing Association is part of a wider group, actually called the Weekly Group. And I mean, Glasgow Housing Association is actually, I was just saying to Carol, it's changed its name 3 weeks ago. It's now called Weekly Homes Glasgow. But that's my fault because I didn't tell you that, Tanya. But it's WHG rather than GHA. But most people in Glasgow will know it's GHA. But no, I mean, I think, at the end of the day, it's obviously the Weekly Group has, I think we've now 95,000 properties, but that's right across the central belt of Scotland, stretching from Edinburgh, Glasgow, right down to Dumfries, Galloway, to, Stranraer, Dumfries in there. So there's a lot of challenges there. So it's the same challenges. And I mean, I think in many ways, I always say it in Northern Ireland, we don't actually promote ourselves enough. We don't tell people outside of Northern Ireland how great we are. And I mean, I take every opportunity to tell people how great we are.
Yeah.
But I have to say, like, Wheatley's doing a lot of work, and but they've been able to borrow money, whereas in Northern Ireland, the likes of the housing executive can't do that. And but it's been well managed, but it doesn't matter the size of the organisation. It's I chair an organisation in Belfast with I'll be corrected on that by the chief executive. I think it's 1,100 now. And yes, that was him, not at the operational end. But at the end of the day, as I always say, when you're flying a plane, it doesn't matter what size the plane are, you need the same skills. Exactly. And the smaller plane, you actually need better skills because you don't have all the technology and all the sort of the cube resources as well. So, I don't think there's a major difference. I think there are different challenges. The common challenges we all have is Carol mentioned, is the zero carbon retrofitting. I mean, in Glasgow, we have tenement blocks, 1919, pre-1919 tenement blocks that really do need sort of a lot of money put into them. Wheatley Hopes Glasgow, we have 131 high-rise blocks, all 26 story. Now, you can imagine what you have to do. And during COVID, and that was a challenge in itself. And I mean, it's making decisions on whether you demolish, whether you refurbish, who you put into them, what you do. And also, there's different challenges. But I mean, I think the expertise is there both here in Northern Ireland and in Scotland. To carry out those challenges, But I think at the end of the day, it's very much, I suppose, the think yes culture. Very much the tenant is there first, and that happens both sides. That happens here as well, where you've got community networks. You've got people rely on the tenant's voice and giving the tenants a voice in their area so that they can be heard and they can actually get involved in plans, get involved in decisions, so that you're doing right for you're treating people as human beings and saying, well, look, what do you need? Tell us what you need and we'll do it for you. And I think you've got that culture crosses both sides. I'm not so sure in England, but I'll not go into that one. But in some parts of it, but
and maybe Tanya, I could pick up on that because I think at Clanmil, we are re-establishing and reimagining our relationship with our customers, because it's really important that we not only are we their landlord, they expect services for us, and they're entitled to a particular service from us, and we're working hard. We will never always get it right, but we will continue to do our best to ensure that we engage with them, we understand what it is they want us to do, and that they can get the same level of customer service from us as their landlord that they would in other aspects of their life. And to pick up the point on decarbonisation, and you mentioned about how contractors and developers also could work better with the sector in Northern Ireland. With challenges around the need to retrofit our stock, there's an opportunity to look at supply chain availability in Northern Ireland, and to look at what are we going to do about heating systems? What are we going to do about the way we build? And again, if there was certainty, if there was greater collaboration and there was certainty, that might bring availability of supply chain back into Northern Ireland, and allow us to retrofit our homes earlier, and make them much more energy efficient, and much more easier to run. Particularly, we're facing the worst cost of living crisis that we've experienced in decades, and our customers are finding it difficult, and are having to make choices around whether to feed their family, heat their home, or pay their rent. And so it's really important that the homes we provide are as efficient to run as possible. But all of that is challenging. And it's about how we can all work better together to be able to deal with all of that.
That is a very important, valid point that you've just mentioned that I was going to touch on, is the current economic climate, the increase in energy costs, hyperinflation. I mean, it just seems to be non-stop at the moment on the news coming through. How are these issues directly affecting social housing for yourselves on the ground? That they're bound to be having huge impact. Well, maybe not even now, but certainly for you down the line.
So I
in terms of the supply,
of that, and it'd be useful also to get Paddy's perspective on that. So I suppose it's it's first of all, it's about our customers who live in our homes and the impact for them in terms of the stark choices that some of them will have to make. And again, at Clanmil, we've worked hard to make sure that we can support them as best we can. We have a financial inclusion team who work with many of our customers to ensure that they can get access to the right financial resources that they can to enable them to live well. As an organisation, we've also looked at a specific hardship policy so that we can also support our customers in difficult times. And then there's the organisational impacts, because as an organisation, we are seeing the costs of maintenance increase. We're seeing the cost of building materials increase. We're seeing the cost, there is a construction skills shortage in Northern Ireland, and we're seeing the impact of that on labour costs for the cost to build new homes. So, what's really important then is that we are very mindful of what we spend our money on, and we use those resources well to ensure that we're putting that to the best use possible, both for our customers, our colleagues and our organisation.
And the 44, like you mentioned back there at the start of the conversation about there currently being a waiting list of 44,000, is that correct? With the current increase in construction costs and labour shortages, as you rightly so say, are we right in saying that is only going to further increase that waiting list because it's going to take longer to build the homes?
There is an annual target that the housing association sector is funded to deliver in terms of new homes. And if the amount of capital funding is not provided to sustain those number of new homes each year, then as the waiting lists grow, and the trajectory is that they are going to continue to grow, then the gap then between supply and demand is obviously going to widen. And therefore it's really important that, particularly in the absence of a Northern Ireland executive at the moment, that we do keep housing high on the political agenda, and that we ensure that adequate capital funding is made available, because for the amount of government grant housing associations get in Northern Ireland, on average, the housing association sector built 2-for-1 homes for the amount of grant funding that they receive. But we do look forward. There's the emerging reform of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. And we look forward to seeing how that will work itself out and what that might mean to work collaboratively with the housing association sector in terms of ability to continue to deliver more great homes.
Yes, I'm sure that's something that you definitely would welcome and look forward to happening. Just when you mentioned as well about that, the one of the policies in relation to government as well, and why we need certainly Stormont back up and running, the plan and gain policy, that's... Why do you feel that it's taken so long, or do you have any thoughts on why it's taken so long for this policy to be implemented? Is surely if it was fully implemented in all our council areas, that would surely help to tackle the shortage of social housing.
Well, I have a view, and I'm sure Paddy will have a view as well. I suppose Northern Ireland has been the last region of the British Isles to bring any form of plan and gain. So we do have it in the UK, we actually have it in the Republic of Ireland, and we don't currently have it in Northern Ireland. And yet there is a strategic plan and policy ambition that all new homes in Northern Ireland should be mixed tenure. And one of the key ways, and this also in some way would dissipate the stigma associated with social housing, in that if there was an element of planning gain and the emerging trend with the adoption of the new local development plans will bring that into policy per se, and it will be a real opportunity to deliver the quantum of new homes that are necessary, but also creating that socio-economic mix that will enable us all to live better together and enable us all to be part of sustainable communities.
Absolutely. I mean, I for one think that is an absolutely crucial policy that needs to be implemented as soon as possible, because it will also help to address the shortage, but also the stigma that is.
Can I just come in there then, Tanya, please? There's three things that I'm going to mention It's examples, there's many more of how Northern Ireland operates so slowly. And it's not the Housing Association's fault, it's not the Housing Executive's fault. I'm not blaming it's not a blame game, but I mean, I'll take one plan against one. I spoke at a conference in 2008 about this in Templepatrick. It was about to be introduced then. It might have been even 2007. They were going to introduce it at the time of there was also an affordability review going on at the time. Carried out research and a fundamental review of housing allocations in 2013. That's nothing still really has been implemented from that. The revitalisation of the Housing Executive has been going on for 20 years. It was meant to be announced in Stormont at the end of March. I was part of the panel, but at the same time, now I'm not saying that obviously the current situation has made it difficult, but this has been going on for 20 years about the talk about, bringing money in here, doing that, doing the other thing. And I just think that, we don't even hurry slowly. And I just think that and as I said, it's not the fault, I'm not blaming anybody in particular, but I think that we do need to sort of get our finger out and start doing things more quickly than we did before. And I mean, the planning game, as Carol rightly says, you've got you've got England, you've got Scotland, you've got Wales, you've got the south of Ireland, all operating sort of in different ways. Now, at the beginning it was difficult because what had happened was actually they created Stigma because they had mixed tenure estates, but they labelled their social housing. And people knew where the social housing was, and then you had the Guardian doing stories like in London. You had the Poor Doors story, where social tenants going to go in one side of the apartment block, whereas the private tenants could go in another side. I remember going in Sligo, going to do a study in a housing estate there, and they had a wall between the social housing and the private housing. Now, thankfully, that's all changed, and as I said, I chair a housing association in the south that we're building all over the Republic, and a lot of ours are mixed tenure estates, and a lot of it's through leasing and various things, and it does work now. But I just think in Northern Ireland, we're doing so many things, but our hands are tied on so many things as well.
Absolutely. Am I right in saying, I mean, I could be wrong, maybe it's changed. I don't think any of the local council areas have implemented it at all yet, is that right?
It's happening, so none of the local development plans have been adopted yet, but thankfully I do see a space where we're moving towards that becoming the norm when the new local development plans are adopted.
And they've made announcements around Titanic and that, haven't they, Carol, and around those,
Yes, that's right. There is they're pretending. Yes. No. Well, we all look forward to the day that can move on at a much faster pace than it certainly has been, because again, as we do say, there were sometimes the forgotten region of the UK, and the likes of that type of policy not being implemented doesn't help with that view. Paddy, I wanted to just touch on another topic, which I know that you're particularly passionate about, and we might have a chat about, is homelessness sector in Northern Ireland. I suppose it's a global issue and that, but for me, we chatted previously before about how whenever the pandemic first hit, how homeless people were able to be taken off the streets and helped out and housed pretty much immediately, and yet we still have people now back on the streets.
Exactly. I mean, they were swept off the streets basically, and they were put into hotels, various things. The same happened in Glasgow, same happened in Edinburgh, same happened all over. All of a sudden, the homeless problem stopped. But at the end of the day, it's really, homelessness is much more than just about not having a house. It's or not having shelter. People will argue, is it rooflessness? People think of homelessness as people sleeping on the streets, but it's not. I mean, it's people not having secure accommodation. It's people living in overcrowded accommodation. People sofa surfing. People living in concealed households that really can't get. People living in domestic violence situations because they can't get out of it. They can't get housing. So there's so many different areas, and a home's much different to a house now. But the homeless figures we get are basically people applying to be classed as homeless, and or people on a waiting list who aren't classed as homeless, but they must be homeless, so they wouldn't be on a waiting list. They must be looking some type of housing. They're not in satisfactory housing at the moment. And this morning, I was just saying to you, this morning I was looking at something, and I was tweeting this morning that it's 30 years since I was chair of the Chartered Institute of Housing in Northern Ireland this month, but I don't know what date it was. But I happened to look back at the homeless statistics, and the homeless, there was only 20,000 homeless then, and there's 40,000 now, 30 years ago.
And you would have thought, you would like to think that in modern times it should have reduced rather than...
Now, there's obviously reasons for that. I mean, that's just a quick anecdotal thing that, I said. So I think, there's certainly a major problem. And anybody working in housing will say, the will's there. People want to build houses. People want to supply the houses. You mentioned earlier on about modular housing. I mean, there are like terraces, for instance, like, home care, that are producing very, very good energy efficient modular houses, but it's getting them on site and getting the land to put them on site. In the south of Ireland, it's the exact same. People are, crying out for different types of housing, but then sometimes you get the administrative structures that are actually against that. And I just think people have to start working together and say, look, why do we have 40? How come for 2 years we've got everybody off the streets?
Now, granted, obviously, the likes of the example of you saying that there were, there was hotels not used, hospitality clearly had closed down, so those buildings were there and they were empty. But I'm sure that there's lots of other examples as well as just hotels. If there's a will, there's a way. And even when you mention about the modular solutions, back to your point about creative building, there are those creative building solutions that certain companies like Tarz's and many others are looking into, and it's that type of...
I grew up in an aluminium bungalow, and it was perfect. I mean, we called it Tin Town Kids. It was freezing. There's no heating, and there's icicles on the windows. But my goodness, we loved it. And there's, I would go back to visit it. Obviously, my mother's long dead now, but I go back to visit it, and there's 16 of the 20 are third generation families living in those aluminium bungalows because the space was good, the community was good. There's these perceptions about what you need and what you don't need. There's so many different solutions that are out there.
So many of you, everybody come, and there's such a shortage of houses. The supply is obviously clearly so much lower than the demand. So there is enough room for everybody in terms of business. There doesn't need to be that kind of competitiveness. We should all be working collaboratively together with the likes of people that are providing maybe modular solutions as well as private developers. There is enough scope and enough opportunity for everybody there to be able to tackle it. One last question that I just wanted really to put to both of you to kind of bring us to a close is, what do you feel are the key challenges facing the social housing sector in Northern Ireland? And we can finish it on that one as in the key factors, if you both... Paddy, do you want to?
Okay, I think Carol's mentioned a lot of them actually, so I don't really have to go through the beginning. The cost of living crisis is going to be major. It's going to have a massive impact, and you're talking about utility bills rising, you're talking about inflation, you're talking about even energy, energy costs, you're talking about fuel, you're talking about so many things, and at the end of the day, there's only so much money people have, and And it's not just the impact on their physical well-being, it's their mental well-being as well, and mental health. That's something which really doesn't come up. Well, it's coming up a lot more now than it did when I was growing up. When I was growing up, it was a stigma, and nowadays people are honest about it. But at the same time, it's fantastic. Yeah. But this is going to have a major impact when people are fighting over the pennies, when people are sort of struggling, will I put the heating on or will I eat? And those questions will happen. And that's going to have a major impact on the supply side. Carol's right, you've got all the costs are going up. There's a lack of labour, there's the availability of labour, materials, supply chains, with the Ukrainian crisis, with Brexit, everything else. And all of these things have still to hit us yet.
Well, that's it. We're really probably only at the very start of actually realising it on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got the zero carbon, and if we're pushing towards that there, well, obviously we'll do well when people can't drive their cars anymore, and when people can't, heat their houses anymore, But what I'm saying is that to actually work the zero carbon. You've got organisations like ours, like Carol's, like all the other associations, like the Housing Association. They're working flat out to do what they can, but their hands are tied in many ways. Yeah. They could do much more if they're allowed to do it. And I just think maybe you have to think and say, well, free up these organisations and let them do what they're good at.
Yes, absolutely. Carol, any others you want to add to that?
A few to add, rather than sort of repeat. A couple of things. I think as we've talked this afternoon, I think it's clear that housing is such a cross-cutting issue. And I think it's really important that, and I would call on our politicians to come back together and form an assembly, and then let's look at a standalone housing outcome in the programme for government, because then that does ensure that housing is cross-cutting and that we have that real joined up government around making sure that we can make a difference. And I suppose just a couple of other things, maybe Tanya, is, again, Paddy mentioned the housing selection scheme. It would be good to see the recommendations that had been taken forward now fully implemented, to ensure that we can deliver sustainable communities. And really, let's see if we can deliver more great homes and provide the gift of a home for those who need that now.
Yeah, that's really true. That's excellent. For me, like the take home here today is that, social housing is for everyone, should be treated with respect for everyone. Everyone is certainly entitled to a roof for their heads, and here in Northern Ireland we should all be working very much collaboratively together, because there are great minds out there. There are so many alternative creative solutions that we can all bring together. If there's, as you say, if there's a will, there's a way. So if we all want it to happen, if we can come together, and if we can get Stormont back up and running and come together with that collective view. Is there any final kind of take-home messages? We will put out a few key messages from our discussions today for everyone to hear, which I think there's been a lot of great stuff there to take home. Is there any key messages that you both would like to communicate to listeners now before we finish up, that you really would like to people to listen to? Yeah, use the opportunity to get any key messages now.
Well, I suppose, if I could, and social housing is so valuable for so many people, and it's really important that we provide good quality homes, and they are available for families who need them, because of the position that they find themselves in. And we want to be able to provide more great homes to give everyone an opportunity to live well, flourish and thrive and be part of a sustainable community. And I think the people of Northern Ireland, I think would prescribe to that.
I think so too. And given the economic climate that we're all in, the cost of living crisis, none of us know what our future lies. None of us know what circumstances we could find ourselves in. And some of us out there, we could all require the support from a social housing association for a roof over our homes, and so for that reason we should all be very much supportive of it. We should certainly not be involved in any level of negative stigma towards anyone social housing, because none of us know when we could be in a position that could require support and help with that.
I think also, there'll be a lot more people going into the poverty line. There'll be people actually on middle incomes that'll be impacted, and that's why, when we're talking about affordable housing models, but people may well come into the situation where they can't afford the rents, because rents are still going up in the private sector. House prices are going up, particularly in certain areas, obviously, but that will impact on people on their sort of disposable income. And it may be that you will have people, you might have crises where households split up and various things, so there'll be more impact. But I always say, think of the children. And I always think of myself growing up in that one-parent family, 4 boys, and it was tough, but my goodness, you want to think of the child and think of the children in those houses. Yes. And basically, we shouldn't be allowing anybody to grow up in a situation where they're disadvantaged, and social housing providers and managers can do a lot for that.
That is excellent. Absolutely. So many really good, useful, key take-home messages there, and really important, real human messages that we all need to take on board. And as I said at the very beginning, we all do have a responsibility and play a role in some small way. So thank you both very, very much for taking the time out to join me today for this discussion, and delighted that we have now got to actually bring it through without any further technical issues. So thank you to anyone that has listened in. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will speak soon. Thank you.